Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. And the elephant in the room is the Zondo Commission. Why so? Well, why is the South African taxpayer wasting millions of rand on the Zondo Commission when no politician is going to be charged? The whole thing is just a charade. All it's doing is revealing how corrupt the entire government is, but no one at the end of the day is going to face a court because it's politically inexpedient for that to happen. And there's a lot of proof of this. Let me tell you why. Hardly a week passes by without new evidence emerging that many South African politicians and their business benefactors are involved in corruption, money laundering, theft and fraud. Why then has there been so little movement from the National Prosecuting Authority, or NPA, to charge and prosecute the army of suspects, and there are hundreds of them? When advocate Shamila Batohi started work in February this year as National Director of Public Prosecutions, or NDPP, it raised unrealistic expectations with the public that the NPA would soon begin to charge and prosecute the very many corrupt politicians and business people. This was never going to happen, as there are severe constraints on the ability of the NDPP to speed up prosecutions. While it would have been marvellous if it had been different, it is not possible for the NDPP to fix internal NPA problems overnight. Some of the reasons why prosecutions are not happening also has very little to do with the NPA. On this last point, the NPA cannot prosecute cases unless these cases have been properly investigated, and unless investigators have prepared dockets containing sufficient evidence to warrant prosecution. Normally, more about this later, the NPA does not itself conduct criminal investigations. It relies on either the South African Police Service, or SAPS, or on the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigations, also called the Hawks, to investigate crime activity and to collect the evidence which would be used by prosecutors to try and secure criminal convictions in court. The problem is that political interference in both the SAPS and the Hawks have had a devastating effect on the willingness and ability of those employed by these bodies to fearlessly investigate corruption, money laundering, theft and fraud perpetuated by well-connected politicians and by their business benefactors. The long list of disastrous political appointees as Commissioner of the South African Police Service is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the politicisation of the SAPS is concerned. As anyone who has ever attended a protest march will attest, many SAPS members are badly trained and unable to distinguish between their loyalty to the governing party and their duty to uphold the rule of law. The Hawks has its own problems, having been born in sin. Recall, the Hawks was created to give the impression that the Zuma government was not indifferent about corruption while protecting the Zuma faction from prosecution for corruption. To ensure political control over the Hawks, it could not originally operate independently from the political influence of the government. Most importantly, the Minister of Police retained final control over which cases could be investigated by the Hawks. A few weeks after the Constitutional Court removed the power of the Minister of Police to control decisions by the head of the Hawks on which cases to investigate, the Minister suspended then head of the Hawks, Anwar Dramat, from his position. Eventually, the Minister relied on trumped-up charges to remove Anwar Dramat from his position as head of the Hawks. Dramat had to be removed because the crooked politicians and their crooked private benefactors believed that he was too honest and too independent to be trusted with their freedom. Dramat was replaced by the odious General Burning Ntlezimeza, whose appointment was later declared invalid by the High Court. In the judgment declaring his appointment invalid, the High Court held that General Ntlezimeza had a contemptuous attitude towards the rule of law and the principle of legality and transparency. Another court had previously found that Ntlezimeza was guilty of dishonesty and of acting in bad faith. Intlamiza has now been replaced by Advocate Godfrey Lebeya, while the South African Police Service, or SAPS, is now headed by General Kelya Sitoli. But many of the senior people appointed by their less than honest predecessors are still working in the SAPS and the Hawks. Worse, the political interference into the Hawks and the SAPS also led to an exodus of many of the best and most honest investigators employed by these bodies. At best, there is now a dire shortage of skilled investigators who can collect the appropriate evidence required for a successful prosecution of complex financial crimes, which means that one way to speed up investigations of politically tainted corruption, money laundering, theft and fraud, and to try and improve the chances of successfully prosecuting the corrupt politicians and their private sector benefactors, one would need to get rid of the SAPS and the Hawks and a large number of senior officers, and would have to replace them with more professional, more honest, more competent, and more diligent people. This has not happened. For both political and legal reasons, it is not likely to happen, which means that for the time being, it would be naive to hope that the SAPS and the Hawks will speedily and effectively investigate the large number of priority crimes involving politicians and politically connected business people. If the NPA had to rely on the Hawks to gather sufficient evidence to ensure prosecution, very few of the so-called state capture culprits would ever see the inside of a courtroom. It is true that some of the vacancies within the Hawks have recently been filled, and that it has completed some investigations into corruption and is awaiting feedback from the NPA. But I'd be very surprised if Hawks investigations will, in the short to medium term, lead to a large number of high-profile corruption prosecutions. I suspect this is exactly why in March this year, President Cyril Ramaphosa created a special investigative directorate inside the NPA. The directorate, headed by Advocate Hermione Cronje, is situated within the NPA. This allows the directorate to conduct investigations in which both prosecutors and other investigators are involved, similar to the method used by the former Scorpions. The proclamation establishing the directorate gave it extraordinary wide jurisdiction to decide which crimes to investigate. Apart from common law offences, including fraud, forgery, uttering, theft, and any other offences involving dishonesty, the Directorate also has the power to investigate various statutory offences relating to corruption, money laundering, organised crime, and various offences committed in terms of the Public Finance Management Act, Municipal Management Act, Financial Intelligence Centre Act, and any other statutory offence involving dishonesty. It is also empowered to investigate any unlawful activities relating to serious, high-profile, or complex corruption, including but not limited to offences of criminal or unlawful activities arising from the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, the Nugent Commission of Inquiry into SARS, and the Mpati Commission of Inquiry into the Public Investment Corporation, or PIC. If the Special Investigative Directorate is properly funded and managed, it is more likely to have significant success in bringing the high-profile politicians and their enablers to book. But this is not the end of the story. The NPA itself is in crisis. Ever since it was created, the NPA has been mired in controversy. While the Constitutional Court has confirmed that the NPA, and specifically the NDPP, enjoy constitutionally protected independence, and that the politicians and other powerful role players are not permitted to interfere in prosecutorial decisions, there has consistently been political interference in the work of the NPA and the NDPP. Moreover, since Vusi Piccoli was unlawfully removed from his post as NDPP, a long line of full-time and acting national directors of public prosecutions contribute to the weakening of the NPA, often with the assistance of then President Jacob Zuma. Many politically motivated senior appointments were made by Zuma and by various NDPPs. President Ramaphosa recently moved to nullify the appointment of several senior NPA leaders appointed in the dying days of the Zuma regime, but this move is being challenged in court. During the era of Menzi Simelane, Sean Abrahams and Ongogobo Jiba, many skilled and committed prosecutors also left the NPA. NDPP Shamila Batohi inherited a dysfunctional and weak institution, and it is going to take years to fix the NPA. Just because the NPA is now headed by an honest and fearless person does not mean that all the institutional problems and weaknesses of the organization will magically disappear. No wonder that Hawke's Head advocate Godfrey Lebeya complained to Parliament earlier this year that it still takes months for the NPA to make decisions on whether to prosecute cases prepared by the Hawks. One outstanding decision was in respect of alleged 11 million rand fraud over misrepresentations former Eskom CEO Brian Molefe made to the Power Utilities Pension Fund, as ventilated at the Parliamentary State Capture Inquiry of 2017. The NPA faces another problem, not of its own making. This is a problem faced by prosecuting authorities in many parts of the world. By its very nature, those who have stolen millions or even billions of rand now have very deep pockets and can spend vast amounts of money on their criminal lawyers. The NPA, on the other hand, does not have unlimited funds to secure the successful prosecutions of the rich culprits. In such cases, there is no equality of arms between the defense and the accused, which means the NPA is likely to be legally outwitted unless it takes extraordinary care with the preparation of their cases. To make things even more difficult, accused persons with deep pockets can, with the assistance of ethically challenged lawyers, exploit the various procedural rules to delay the proceedings and can place extra pressure on the NPA by drawing it into an expensive and time-consuming fight over procedural issues. Jacob Zuma and his lawyers did this brilliantly because Zuma had access to unlimited state funds to pay for it all, dragging out his case for more than 10 years. When a case is politicized, every small technical victory for the accused against the NPA will also be politically exploited to try and discredit the NPA and the prosecution. Imagine what would happen if the NPA prosecuted Ace Magashula, Julius Malema, or Floyd Shivambu, and the court then ruled that the search warrant used to gather evidence in the case was invalid. It would be like Christmas for the accused. All this means that if the NPA decides to go after extremely rich or extremely powerful individuals, it would have to make absolutely sure that it has its ducks in a row. It would therefore not be surprising to hear that the NDPP is holding back some high-profile prosecutions because of procedural weaknesses in the various investigations. It is important to be aware of the reasons set out above for the lack of high-profile prosecutions for corruption, theft, money laundering, and fraud. But this does not mean that we should not demand that the SAPS, the Hawks, and the NPA do better. Patience is running out. Indeed it is. And that's why I said at the very start of this video, don't hold your breath. I doubt if any politicians or well-connected business people will see the inside of a court over fraud and corruption. All right, guys, please remember to subscribe to be kept informed. Ring the bell for the updates. Please like this video. Please share this video. And above all, stay safe. Bye for now.